about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
I'm going to step off the limb now.
So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
People will return to the people, and so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You are men. You are men.
Welcome to the Rock Worldwide Show here on WSHO Sunshine 800 AM. Big show planned for you today. Weeks like this week make show prep so easy. I know we will not be able to get to everything in 1 hour, but we will do our best. Glad you've tuned in. Glad you joined us. Hopefully you will make this a kind of a regular thing for you. Jump in at 11 o'clock and stick around for 12 o'clock with Issue and Answers, with Elder Mike Indes. And, of course, stick around as well at 1 o'clock for On-Air Fellowship with Minister Matthew Shropshire. So don't go anywhere. Make these 3 hours your Saturday morning, early afternoon ritual. Get you a good, strong cup of coffee. Get you a notebook. Get your Bible ready, and hopefully you'll be a little bit better off at the end of these 3 hours. All right, so lots to get to. We are, how many weeks now? How many days? We are 59 days. We are under 60 days before the election of the next president of the United States. In these next 60 days, you will not believe the things that you're going to hear, especially about President Trump. And this is just one example. Obviously, Matt Drudge over at the Drudge Report has fallen out of favor with President Trump, and he is not helping President Trump. As a conservative news aggregator, one of the most influential people in the game, he is not helping President Trump in any way, shape, or form. And it could be because Trump hasn't built the wall. He didn't get what he said he was going to do in that regard. Also, I think there was some relationship between Ann Coulter and Matt Drudge. And, of course, Ann has soured on President Trump now. But nevertheless, he's running this report about President Trump. There was a report that came out that basically President Trump said Americans who died in war are losers and suckers, that the military has been kept out of military parades if they were wounded, so no wounded veterans, that claims that the MIA soldiers, missing in action soldiers deserve their fate, and all this other stuff. Fox News is even confirming the reports. There's a retired general, I'm not even going to give him the dignity of naming him. And this is one of the things we got to be careful of as conservative people, as patriots, that we don't lift up our military in a way that they become sort of like the president becomes like the Pope, and the generals and the military, the high-ranking military officials become like the Council of Cardinals, that what they say, although they know more, especially like boots on the ground and intelligence on the ground, the threats that none of us would want to have to deal with on a regular basis. They know these things, but just them knowing these things doesn't necessarily make what they say and their opinions infallible. And this is not all too different from what we remember happened in 2015. The New York Post back in 2015 ran a story about how they said Trump is toast. He said that McCain was not a war hero. They ran the headline, Don Voyage, like goodbye. Ensue egg on face. So this is not that much different. But there is some new information coming out about the whole evolution of this story. The story was run by The Atlantic. This is the reporting as of the Daily Wire. The Atlantic owner is, surprise, a Biden mega donor, and is close to the story's author. However, there is a sixth witness, this particular witness. So there's already been 5 people that have come out and refuted the story and said that there's nothing true about the story. Trump didn't do what the article is claiming, but that doesn't prevent the mainstream media from running the story as though it is absolutely fact. And this sixth witness, who is a Trump opponent, actually disputes the Atlantic article. But the billionaire owner of the Atlantic, which is a left-wing magazine, is a Democrat mega donor. She refers to herself as a philanthropist, Laurene Powell Jobs. I wonder if she's related to Steve. I didn't actually check that out. And she has donated more than $1.2 million to nearly 70 Democrat politicians since 2019. She is reportedly in close contact with the journalist who published a hit piece on Donald Trump that claimed, based on only anonymous sources. Now, Drudge is running the headline right now. Was Kelly, former Chief of Staff General Kelly, the source? That still remains to be seen. It was an anonymous source, but basically that said that Trump called American soldiers losers and suckers. Now, the Daily Caller News Foundation investigative reporter Andrew Kerr reported that Jobs obtained a 70% ownership stake in the Atlantic through her firm. The DCNF reported, quote, in November, she further solidified her control over the magazine after its longtime chairman, David Bradley, said he was going to step away from management, according to Politico. Powell Jobs contributed $2,800 to former Vice President Joe Biden's primary campaign in October, and in June she divvied out an additional $610,000 to the Biden Victory Fund. Goldberg and Powell Jobs did not return requests for comment, asking if Powell Jobs had any involvement in or had any advanced knowledge of Goldberg's anonymously sourced story, close quote. But the Daily Caller further noted that a hard-left political group had launched digital advertisements attacking Trump just hours before the story broke, where the group included multiple remarks from Gold Star families and somehow managed to have all of this done in just a matter of hours. On Friday, fierce Trump opponents, this is the sixth witness that refutes this story. As you all well know at this point, John Bolton is no Trump supporter. But opponent John Bolton actually came out and strongly disputed the Atlantic's report, saying that he was there on the trip when the remarks allegedly occurred, yet he said he never heard anything along the lines of what they had claimed. In fact, he said had he heard that kind of comment made about another country's forces or just anything along that lines, had he heard anything like that. Now, this is reporting from John Roberts. Fox News correspondent John Roberts tweeted this out. Said, Ambassador John Bolton told me today that if President Donald Trump had said he didn't want to visit the place in France where the interred heroes were because they were losers and suckers. He said he would have written an entire chapter about it in his book, The Room Where It Happened. Bolton stated in his memoir that President Trump canceled a visit to the American cemetery near Paris over weather, undercutting a claim in a recent story from The Atlantic. The president scrapped the trip because of the losers and suckers that were buried there. I mean, this is bizarre. If anyone thinks that President Trump, with everything that he's done for the VA, the way he's completely revamped the VA, if you watch the Republican convention, you should have seen the veterans who had been outside of the system because it was so ridiculously cumbersome and just the healthcare wasn't that good. President Trump, under this administration, somehow or another, has gotten it to the point where the VA system is better. So his actions, much in the same way that the media runs reports about him being a racist, his actions to help the black community far exceed what they're actually saying about him in news reports. And I think this is just one example of the same. Bolton now represents the sixth witness who was there that day who says that the Atlantic's report was false. So there's that. What do you think about that? If you're a military vet, does anything like that, does any story go out there, does it change? If you're a proponent of President Trump and his candidacy and his presidency and his bid for re-election, does a story like this, does it even matter to you? I mean, I wonder who's actually reading The Atlantic. Do any conservatives, does anybody read The Atlantic that's not already left-leaning and already has a negative opinion about President Trump? That's sort of my question. But you're going to hear about it over and over and over. Are you going to hear about the black kid who smashed a brick in the back of the head of a white man and knocked him out and then broke his face? No, you're not going to hear that. Are you going to hear that, Jacob Blake was a convicted felon and had felony warrants out for his arrest? Are you going to hear that he resisted, was tased, and was actually armed? Are you going to hear those stories in the mainstream media? No. Are you going to hear anything? Because we're so racist. We live such in the age of racism and America being a place that is just horrible for black people. I mean, if you think about the advantages that white women have over black women, if we agree with people who believe in the myth of white fragility and white privilege, like if you believe that crap, that critical race theory, huckster, grifter crap, then you believe that white women have a greater professional advantage over black women. You just do. Unless your name is Jessica Krug. Now, Jessica Krug might not be a name that you're familiar with yet. But just when you think of Jessica Krug, if you hear that name, what I want you to think about is Rachel Dolezal. Now, Rachel Dolezal ought to be a name that you're familiar with, although you might not remember. Rachel Dolezal, a couple years ago, was an NAACP chapter president, and she was outed as being a white woman running around pretending to be a black woman. And pictures hit the internet where she was like this fair-skinned, red-headed, ginger white girl who identified or who culturally, identified with black culture. She wore her hair in tight curls. She wore it sort of fluffed out like an afro. She wore very dark makeup. She tanned considerably to make her skin darker and to bring out the melanin in her skin. And she, for all intents and purposes, she identified with black culture, and she appreciated what black culture meant. And she, like I said, she was working for the NAACP. So in all intents and purposes, she was struggling through and trying to do her best to help black people. And when she came out and it was discovered that she was actually white, she was canceled and she was shamed. And we were told, you can pretend to be the biological sex of something that you're not, but a completely made up social construct such as race, that is you can't pretend. If you're white, you can't pretend to be black. And if you're black, you cannot pretend to be white. Race is something you can't identify with. Gender is. Never made sense to me. But Jessica Krug is, she actually wrote a post in Medium. She wrote a Medium blog. Medium is a kind of a social media long-form blog site. It's sort of the opposite of Twitter. You can write much greater posts, like longer length of post in Medium. But she actually blogged, and in a post Thursday, she canceled herself. We talk about cancel culture everywhere, run amok, everybody who says anything. There's a USC professor who this last week was saying something in Chinese and actually used words in Chinese, but because it sounded like a negative slang word for a black person, often used in rap lyrics, there was a move to have him canceled and stripped of his professorship at the University of Southern California. You can look that up. But Jessica Krug, she's actually a professor at GW, at George Washington University, and she canceled herself. The 38-year-old white woman said that she had publicly identified as black throughout her career. Now, if we accept what everybody tells us about privilege, I mean, what this woman is either an academic sadomasochist. This woman she is in it for the struggle because she abandoned all of her white privilege. She abandoned her white privilege and decided she wanted to go uphill both ways to and from her professional home in the snow without shoes. She decided she wanted to identify as a black woman. She claims that the only reason, by the way, like she's not getting any brownie points from the ridiculous woke left because she canceled herself. But it's now being reported that the only reason that she came out, that she's, I don't want to say come clean because, on Thursday, because she realized that several scholars were starting to question her background. Yomara Figueroa, an associate professor at Michigan State University, claims that a young black scholar claimed that Krug was lying about her identity. And it emerged after his death in April that he was not a black Latino from Cuba. So Figueroa said in the allegations that they came up in a discussion about the late novelist H.G. Carrillo. Carrillo, it found out that he was not a black Latino, but he was an African American, simply an African American from Detroit. Now, if you have American blacks pretending to be foreign-born black Cubans, and you have white girls from the Midwest, I think this woman is Jewish. I think she grew up in Kansas. Let's see here. Dr. Yo Figgy, at Dr. Yo Figgy on Twitter, said that the only reason Jessica Krug finally admitted to this lie is because on August 26th, one very brave, very black Latina junior scholar approached two senior black Latina scholars and trusted them enough to do the research and back her up. And those two scholars made phone calls and reached out to other. So she was about to get canceled, but she figured she'd get ahead of the whole thing and she would cancel herself first. So here we have why. Let's just think about this for a second. Let's use our brains and let's stop and think. Why would a white woman, I'm looking at some of the pictures in this story, but why would a white woman, let's see here, why would a white woman pretend that she was a black woman while being in academics? Because this woman, she lives in East Harlem. She has previously described herself as an unrepentant, an unreformed child of the hood. But come to find out, she actually went to an exclusive Barstow school in Kansas City, Missouri, where she lived as a white Jewish girl. So, man, why would she reject all of that privilege? Why would she? Doesn't she realize? I mean, she got a PhD from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know why she identified. This is what the media won't report. There is systemic racism in the United States of America. Walter Williams wrote a piece in the Epoch Times this week where he said the biggest place where institutional racism or systemic racism takes place is at the college and university level. We have cases that have come from the Department of Justice, and these cases show that Yale, Princeton, Harvard, many Ivy League schools, not to mention schools from state-run universities all over the country, actively, knowingly, willingly, proudly discriminate against white and Asians on behalf of blacks and Hispanics. This is just a fact. There is racism, systemic and institutional racism that takes place. And Jessica Krug is your newest and best example, your latest example of how racist America isn't. For a white woman to get ahead faster, she became a black woman. Because she knew inherently that as a white woman, she was going to get buried. She was going to get buried in just, there's nothing unique about you, white lady. Black PhD lady? Hey, we can use one of you. You'll look good in our diversity, inclusion, and equity brochure. This is just a fact. Now, Walter Williams pointed out in his article about diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense. And if you don't know about Dr. Walter Williams, you should really check out Dr. Walter Williams. You got to read some of his stuff. Look at some of his YouTube videos. He is, for a long time, he has been a black conservative economist at George Mason University. Tons of common sense, tons of factual, empirical evidence and data that'll help you with your arguments. And he wrote an article recently this week. In the article, he says, check out any professional and most college basketball teams. Take a look at their starting five and most of the other 10 players. 80% of them are black. And in the NBA, it's 80% of the NBA that's black. Now, this does not come anywhere close to the diversity and inclusion sought by the nation's SJWs. Both professional and college coaches have ignored and through any pretense of seeking diversity and inclusiveness. They have completely they've just done away with it. Because here's my question to you, and this is the question that Dr. Williams posed in his article. Would a basketball team be improved if coaches were to require and include ethnically diverse players for the sake of equity? And I don't know what your answer might be, but I can tell you what mine would be. It'd be to HE hockey stick, HE double hockey stick with diversity, equity, and inclusion. If I'm a coach, I'm going to recruit the best players, and I don't care if most of them turn out to be black. And I don't think that any diversity-crazed college president would chastise his basketball coach for a lack of diversity and inclusiveness. There's a thing called the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. The Stanford Linear Accelerator Center at the National Accelerator Laboratory is home to the world's most powerful experiments, fastest supercomputers, top-notch physics researchers. And much of the SLAC's research is on particle accelerators that are complicated machines designed and engineered and operated to produce high-quality particle beams and develop clues to the fundamental structure of matter and the forces between subatomic particles. And you can bet that their personnel makeup exhibits very little concern about racial diversity, equity, or inclusion. The bulk of their scientists are not only of European and Asian ancestry, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're mostly men. But again, my question to you is, what do you make of SLAC's more illustrative of the racial, ethnic, and sexual diversity of America? Like, would you make them operate under quotas? Again, my example would be the same one that I gave in a basketball example. If I'm there, I'm going to recruit the brightest scientists. I don't care if most of them turn out to be men or women or of European or Asian ancestry. Now, it is true that in the hard sciences, you're going to find that Black Americans are underrepresented. For example, there's a 2018 survey of the American Astronomical Society, which includes undergraduates, grad students, faculty members, retired astronomers, and it found that 82% of members identified as white and only 2% as Black or African American. Only 3% of bachelor's degrees in physics go to Black students. In 2017, some fields, such as structural engineering and atmospheric physics, graduated not a single Black PhD. The conspicuous absence of Black Americans in the sciences have little or nothing to do with racism. It has to do with academic preparation. If a person graduates from high school and has not mastered a minimum proficiency in high school algebra, geometry, or pre-calculus, it's pretty likely that a high-paying career such as engineering or medicine or physics or computer technology are hermetically sealed off for life from these people. There are relatively few Black fighter jet pilots. To become a fighter jet pilot, there are stringent physical, character, and mental requirements which many Black applicants could meet. But fighter pilots must also have a strong knowledge of air navigation, aircraft operating procedures, flight theory, fluid mechanics, meteorology, engineering. And these college majors that help prepare undergrads for a career as a fighter pilot include mathematics, physical science, engineering. But if you graduate from high school without elementary training in math, it isn't likely that you're going to enroll in college courses that are going to qualify you to become fighter pilot trained. At many predominant Black high schools, not a single Black student tests proficient in math and very low percentage tests proficient in reading. However, these schools, they give diplomas. And these diplomas attest that these students can read, write, and compute at a 12th grade level. And these schools often boast that they have a 70% or higher graduation rate. But they mislead their students. They mislead the families of these students. And they mislead everyone in general within education in the United States. They're not doing anybody a favor. They're misleading everyone by conferring these fraudulent diplomas. And keep in mind who is offering choice. Republicans offer and want school choice. Public schools are beholden to the teachers' unions and teachers' unions support Democrats. So Democrats don't want choice because Democrats need the money that is given to them by the public sector unions and especially the teachers' unions. So the Democrats are not going to want choice. And when you don't have choice, inner city black kids and inner city Hispanic kids are the ones who get the most of a raw deal. You don't get to take your kid out of a community school that stinks on ice. But you keep voting for Democrats who won't give you your tax dollars and let them follow your kid where you want them to go. You put your kids into a school that's better for them, that performs higher, because the money's there. The money's there. It's following your kid. But they won't give it to you because they don't trust you to know what's best for your child. But in places, look, that was the first thing that Barack Obama did when he became president, is he killed the charter school program in Washington, D.C., while sending his daughters to one of the most elite schools in Washington, D.C., in the tri-state area. So then what explains the fact that over 80% of professional basketball players are black and about 70% of professional football players are black? I mean, only an idiot would really chalk it up to diversity and inclusion. It is excellence. Excellence displays the disproportionate numbers. Jewish Americans, who are just about 3% of our population, win over 35% of the Nobel Prizes in science that are awarded to Americans. It's excellence. Excellence is what explains the disproportionality. Not diversity, not inclusion. Dr. Walter Williams was one of the few black families in the 50s and 60s that was split up. But his mom soon married the man who raised him, his stepfather. And Dr. Walter Williams' stepfather often told him, to do well in this world, you have to come early and you have to stay late. That is a formula for success. Come early, stay late. Put in the work, get in the gym, hit the books, study, read, listen, work. This is what fathers tell their children. This is what people who are successful, they don't work and think like employees. They think like business owners. They don't work when the clock says work is over. They work until the job gets done, until the goals are committed. They work with excellence. And if you don't, that's what's so great about the market. If you don't work, if you don't do what's necessary, if you don't bring value to the market doesn't care about your good intentions. The market doesn't care about your story. It cares, are you bringing value to the market? Because if you bring value to the market will pay you what you're worth. One of the things you're not going to hear right now, whether it's stories about President Trump, there's going to be story after story after story that comes out over the next several weeks and months leading into the election. And there's going to be, of course, more protest and more chaos. There's going to be a ton of mail-in ballot fraud problems. In 2019, and I'm going to talk about this for the rest of the program here, and I'll probably pick back up on it next week because on the 7th, a brand new book drops. And I can't wait to get my hands on it. I've already got it pre-ordered on the 7th. And see what today is. If it's on Monday, I'll have this book read before the show next week for sure. The new book is called 10 Global Trends Every Smart Person Should Know. Now, in 2019, months before we even had a word for COVID-19, a YouGov poll found that a staggering 68% of Britons, people from England, people from Great Britain, generally speaking, thought that the world was becoming a worse place to live. As a conservative evangelical, I can promise you that the common explanation of everything we see going around us in the world today is things are getting worse, just like the Bible says has to happen. When the same question was asked of citizens of roughly about 17 different countries in 2016, YouGov found that Britain was the least optimistic of the third of those countries. Fewer than 1 in 20 of Britons feel that the world was getting better. Now, it may be that pessimism is ingrained in part of Britain's national psyche. But the problem with this gloomy thinking is that it's completely detached from the world that we actually live in. Now, in this new book that's coming out, one of the things that I'm excited about is it gives a detailed and articulate account of the incredible but largely unknown progress that we've made in recent times. I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but here's just a kind of a taste, a little bit of an idea. And the reason this is important for us as Christians is because there is sort of a version of biblical interpretation that lends itself well to using the newspaper, or in our case now that nobody really reads a physical newspaper, under the age of 135. I mean, if you're older than 135, you're probably still reading newspapers. I get it. Now we're typically using websites. We're looking at what? That's true. We're looking at websites and articles, and maybe if you do read a newspaper, it's a digital version of the newspaper. How about that? But we really shouldn't ever try to use current events as a tool for Bible interpretation. It is completely unhelpful. And it completely kinks up your understanding of the text. And remember, we're trying to derive our beliefs from the text, not have a set of beliefs and then impose them onto the text. We want to let the Bible create, form, shape, mold our belief systems, the core of us that drives our actions and our decision making, and ultimately forms the worldview of how we interpret. We want to use the Bible to interpret how to interact with the world around us. We don't want the world around us to become a tool for interpretation on the meaning of the scriptures. So I think there was a local newscaster, Ken Jones. I don't know if any of you remember Ken Jones. He used to be on WDSU. And I used to speak to Ken Jones on a regular basis, and I asked Ken about the media because I knew that he was in the media, so having access to somebody who's a prominent figure in local media and had been around the news business for a while, I asked him about this idea of why is the news seemingly always negative. And he told me, he said, well, we tried as Christians, one of the things we did was we went to Houston and we tried to form a media company that only highlighted good news. We only highlighted good news. We only told stories that were positive. We rarely mentioned anything overly tragic. If there was something bad that happened, it was newsworthy. We mentioned it, but we tried to keep a positive spin and a hopeful outlook. I said, well, man, I never heard of that. What was it called? And he told me the name, and I really don't remember it now. But I said, well, man, that was in Houston. I said, but you're here in New Orleans. What happened? He said, well, I'm here in New Orleans. I said, well, yeah, I know. Like, you left the project? He goes, no, we started the project and we couldn't get an audience. We couldn't gain traction. Nobody wanted to tune in and find out about good news. He said people complain all the time that the news is always negative, but the reason the news is always negative is because that's what the audience wants. He said you hear people all the time claim that the media coverage is always negative, but guess what? People tune in. And think about this. Think about what news agencies know and what they do. Not only do they know that you're going to tune in because you want negative coverage, but they give you more of it. They give you 30 minutes at lunch. They give you 3 hours in the morning. They give you a 5 o'clock broadcast. They give you a pre-5 o'clock, 4 o'clock hour. They give you a 6 o'clock hour after the 5:30 national news. Then national news gives you nighttime programming after your 10 o'clock broadcast. And then they give you an early 9 o'clock broadcast. And then we're going to flip it. We're going to give you some weird kind of news. Maybe some news with a twist. So, I mean, all throughout the day, they're giving you 8 to 10 hours of news. Not to mention, then cable comes out, and cable has 24-hour news. You want 24-hour news on the right, 24-hour news on the left, 24-hour news in the middle, 24-hour news, all the time news, and none of it, or very, every once in a while, there's a sweet, heartwarming story. So we can say all we want. Oh, we want things to be positive, but we're inundated and we're drawn like a moth to the flame to negative news. And so you're never going to hear about the progress being made, because really we don't want to hear that. But I argue that we should force ourselves to hear that things are not getting as bad as we think they are. There was a book written in 1974 by an author named Otto L. Bettman. And the book was entitled The Good Old Days, They Were Terrible. Written in 1974. And basically, this book is an archived collection of photographs and prints and images with some commentary about how there was a lot of bad stuff going on in our nation post-Civil War. Because, you have a lot of people who claim they want to return to the supposedly long-lost, halcyon days of, I don't know that people really have a sense of history when you say you want to go back to a particular time. All of us tend to, for some reason, blot out the negative stuff and only dwell on the positive, especially history. I think maybe it helps us to stay sane, maybe. But think about what the author of Ecclesiastes says in Ecclesiastes 7, verse 10. The writer of Ecclesiastes puts the past in perspective in this verse. Look at what he says. He says, quote, "Do not say, why is it that former days were better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this." It's Ecclesiastes 7:10. A very basic, cursory search into this verse. If you take Matthew Henry's commentary, which is sort of not really a commentary, at least not a scholarly commentary, here's the comment on this particular passage. Quote, "The supposition is a foolish reflection upon the providence of God in this world. One is so much a stranger to the times past, and such an incompetent judge, even of the present times, that he cannot expect a satisfactory answer to the inquiry, and therefore he does not inquire wisely." Close quote. I get asked a lot of questions, questions from my family, questions from friends, and a lot of times I get frustrated with myself, so I can only imagine how frustrated they get, because someone will ask me a question, and the question itself requires, it's not a good question, because I can't simply answer the question that they're asking me, because if they had additional knowledge, it would help them to ask a better question. So a lot of times I just have to confirm that that's a good question, but before we get to that, let me lay some foundation that may help you to not only find the answer, but realize you need to be asking a different question. So I joked one time and said, most people ask questions, but they don't even realize, they don't even know the questions that they need to be asking. They don't have enough knowledge to know the questions that they need to be asking based off of the questions that they're actually asking. Like, nobody knows right now that deaths from hurricanes and other natural disasters are lower than ever. Like, we just had Hurricane Laura, which was a big, almost Category 5, a big Category 4 hurricane, give a direct hit to Louisiana. And it destroyed a lot of property. But you know what you didn't hear? You didn't hear about massive deaths. And see, like, the climate change scientists use these big, massive, strong, powerful hurricanes they blame global warming and climate change for these worsening natural disasters. But Michael Mann at Penn State University, or University of Penn State, I'm not sure, Penn State University, claimed that storms are getting more destructive as a consequence of human-caused planetary warming. The New York Times reported that climate change is making hurricanes more dangerous, and in many ways, including increased rainfall and more powerful storm surge. Student activist Greta Thunberg tweeted out videos of the flooding in India and Niger as evidence of climate change's impact on disasters. What more do we need to see, she asked. Well, I'd say a few more viral videos, that it actually turns out. A total of 2,900 people lost their lives in natural disasters in the first half of the year, which is a much lower figure, a much lower average figure for both the last 30 years and in the last 10. One of the greatest successes of turning science into policy is reducing deaths from disasters. A University of Colorado professor and leading expert on climate change and disaster said it's up there with vaccinations. It's huge and can't be overstated. But you might ask, well, aren't natural disasters becoming more expensive? And they are. But that's because we're actually so much richer. Not because hurricanes and floods are so much more severe. In a new review of 54 studies over the last 22 years and published in the field's leading scientific journal, quote, little evidence to support claims that any part of the overall increase in global economic losses documented on climate timescales is attributed to human-caused changes in climate. In other words, hurricanes, floods, and other natural disasters aren't getting worse. They're getting better, much better. There's been a 92% decline in the decadal death toll from natural disasters since its peak in the 1920s. And this is according to the International Disaster Database. In that decade, the 1920s, 5.4 million people died from natural disasters. In the 2010s, 400,000. One of the things that's well understood in the natural disaster community is that how we prepare is a more important factor in the disaster than what we actually how we experience it. If we build well and we build in the right places and we have good warning systems and we have good disaster response policies such as evacuations, we can continue to do well even with much stronger events. Over the last 4 decades, poor nations like Bangladesh have reduced their death tolls by over 90% thanks to simple measures like cyclone warning systems and storm shelters. Take a look at Cyclone Amphan in India and Bangladesh earlier this year. It killed about 120 people. 50 years ago, it had killed thousands. A cyclone in Bangladesh killed 135 people in 1991, while another in 1970 killed 300,000. So these good old days that we hearken for, we don't even know that right now, around the world, global income is rising. Economic historians estimate that in year 1 of the Common Era, in other words, year 1 AD, the average global income per person was about $800. based off of 2011 US dollars. So if we compare the two, an average person on the globe in year 1 AD made about $800. Fast forward 1800 centuries. 18 centuries. Fast forward to the year 1800, and average global incomes had only increased to a measly $1,140. So do you understand that from year 1 AD to 1800, there was barely a $300, a little bit less than a $350 increase in average income for humans across the planet? So that means that the 1800 years separating the birth of Christ and the election of Thomas Jefferson to the United States presidency, average incomes only rose by about 40%. However, things really began to accelerate during the Industrial Revolution. And between 1800 and 1900, average incomes rose from about $1,140 to over $2,000. And thankfully, this progress has drastically increased in recent years. Today, average global incomes are roughly $14,600 per year, more than 622% higher than they were in 1900, or 1,725% higher than they were in year 1 AD. You say, well, $14,600 per year is not a lot of money. Yeah, well, neither is $800, but it's a lot more than $800. The considerable increase in global incomes has largely coincided with the decline in extreme poverty, which is another big example. In 1820, nearly 84% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, defined as living on less than $1.90 per day per person. Roughly 158,000 people escape extreme poverty every day, and many experts predict that extreme poverty could be completely eradicated within a couple of decades. By 1981, 42% of the world lived in extreme poverty. Today, the World Bank estimates suggest that extreme poverty has fallen to just 8.6%. Do you realize that in the world today, estimates are that less than 10% of the entire world today live in extreme poverty? Guys, things are getting better. Things are getting better. And with the right leadership, with the right policies in place, things are going to continue to get better. I encourage you and I challenge you, engage. Engage with your community, engage with your state, with your country. Have an optimistic, hopeful. We're the people who have hope in eternity, everlasting life, resurrection. We have that hope. We can share that hope. We're supposed to let people see the hope that we have in us. And if they see it, they're going to ask for it.